In 1933, the United States government did something that still shocks people to this day. It made owning gold illegal for everyday Americans. Citizens were ordered to hand over their gold coins, gold bullion, and even gold certificates, or risk heavy fines and even prison time. Imagine working your whole life, saving wealth in gold, and then suddenly being told that if you don't turn it in, you're a criminal. This event became known as the Great Gold Confiscation of 1933, and it completely changed the relationship between money, the government, and the American people. But why did this happen? Was it really just about saving the economy, or was it a calculated move to consolidate wealth and power into the hands of a few? Let's break it down. The story begins in the depths of the Great Depression. Banks were collapsing, unemployment was soaring, and people were losing faith in the financial system. At the time, the US dollar was still tied directly to gold. That meant every dollar in circulation was supposed to be backed by a fixed amount of gold held by the government. But as panic spread, people began demanding their gold back from the banks. The Federal Reserve System, still relatively new at that point, was losing its grip on the money supply. Without gold, the system could not expand credit or print more dollars to fight the depression. Something had to give. Enter President Franklin D. Roosevelt. On April 5, 1933, he signed Executive Order 6102. This order required all Americans to turn in their gold to the Federal Reserve by May 1st. The punishment for not complying was up to 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, which would be equivalent to nearly $250,000 today. There were only a few exceptions. Small amounts of jewelry, rare collector's coins, and gold used for certain industries. But for most Americans, this meant surrendering their life savings to the government. The government promised to pay $20,067 per ounce for the gold. But here's the catch. Just a few months later, Roosevelt revalued gold to $35 per ounce. Overnight, the gold that had been seized from the American people increased in value by almost 70%, but that profit went directly to the government, not to the citizens who had been forced to give it up. In simple terms, it was a massive wealth transfer from everyday Americans to the state. So how was this enforced, and how did people react? Well, many Americans did comply. The fear of fines and jail time was enough for most. But some quietly resisted. Families hid gold coins in walls, under floorboards, or even buried them in backyards, hoping to one day pass them down in secret. Some of those stashes have been discovered decades later. But while everyday people were being forced to give up their gold, the wealthy and well-connected often had ways to avoid it. Many had offshore accounts or access to legal loopholes like collectible coins, which allowed them to protect their wealth. Once again, the burden of compliance fell most heavily on the middle and working class. The winners were clear. The government suddenly controlled almost all of the nation's gold, and with the stroke of a pen, had given itself the ability to expand the money supply and finance massive new spending programs, including Roosevelt's New Deal. The losers were the American people, who had seen their wealth stripped away in the name of economic recovery. But let's zoom out even further. Why does this matter? Well, the Great Gold Confiscation marked a turning point in U.S. financial history. Before 1933, gold was seen as the ultimate form of money, something solid, tangible, and beyond manipulation. After 1933, the link between citizens and gold was broken. The dollar still claimed to be backed by gold, but ordinary Americans no longer had direct access to it. The government had taken control. This paved the way for the eventual end of the gold standard altogether, which came in 1971 when President Richard Nixon closed the gold window and the US dollar became a fully fiat currency, backed by nothing but trust. Interestingly, the US wasn't alone in doing this. Other nations also abandoned or restricted gold ownership during this period. Britain had left the gold standard in 1931. But what made the US unique was the severity of enforcement. The government didn't just change the rules, it outright criminalized private ownership of one of the world's oldest forms of money. So, what's the legacy of 1933? For some, it's a lesson in how governments can and will seize wealth when it suits their needs. For others, it's a warning about how fragile financial freedoms can be when fear and crisis dominate. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Some analysts and historians wonder if something similar could happen again, not with gold, but with digital assets. Could governments one day restrict, regulate, or even confiscate cryptocurrency under the justification of protecting the economy? If it happened once with gold, who's to say it couldn't happen again with Bitcoin? Ultimately, the Great Gold Confiscation of 1933 wasn't just an economic event. It was a profound shift in the balance of power between the government and its citizens. It showed that when push comes to shove, control over money is control over people. And while history books often frame it as a necessary step to stabilize the economy, many still see it as one of the greatest wealth seizures in modern history. So was Roosevelt saving America from financial collapse, or was this the biggest government heist of all time? That's for you to decide. This is Elitology, where we examine how power, money, and influence shape the world we live in. If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And let me know in the comments, if you were alive in 1933, would you have handed over your gold or tried to hide it?